Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. What we've learned in executive education is that people are really interested in getting places. So M4 relief roads, trains, they're often big ticket sellers. So thanks ever so much for coming. I'm the Director of Executive Education, Sarah Lethbridge. As ever, if you have any short course needs for your organisation, please do get in contact with me. And also I run our Executive MBA as well. If anyone's interested in that, then again, please do give me a shout. In terms of our future events, we are going to have an event holiday over the summer, and we're looking to start things up again in September. So we've got a professional programmes information evening about all our suite of part-time executive programmes. Again, please do register if you're interested in finding out more about any of those initiatives. And then our next breakfast briefing is going to be on superfast broadband. Hopefully then we've got another breakfast briefing with Vaughan Geffen AM talking about the NHS in Wales and the links with businesses and how we can maximise those. And then the final sort of breakfast briefing that we've got planned of this season for the next term is around what attracts businesses to a region. So if you're not part of our community, please register for our community and we'll make sure we keep you informed about all of the wonderful events in the business school and also in the wider university. So just a little note that our breakfast briefing is being live streamed. Fingers crossed it works. You shouldn't feature on the video. This mainly our presenters that are going to feature on that stream. And if you ask a question at the end, please wait for a microphone so that people can hear the question that you're asking. And now, again, everyone who comes regularly knows I love this bit. This is where I can hand over to our chair, Dr. Andy Potter, to take you through the morning's events. Thanks, Andy.
Okay, thanks for that, Sarah, and welcome everyone to July's breakfast briefing. It's great to see so many of you here. And like I say, clearly transport is a very popular topic for getting people to come along to. It certainly underpins a lot of elements of business, and within the business school, it's certainly an area that a number of us, our colleagues, are working on, particularly in logistics and operations management, where it's a sort of fundamental part of what we do. We've got two great speakers here today to talk about the South East Wales Metro. And obviously it's a key project for the area in terms of enabling us to get around more efficiently. As a matter of interest, how many people came here by car this morning? Do a show of hands. About half. So I think that kind. Don't be shy, Sarah. There's no shame in coming by car. I think what that shows is that not only that there's a lot of us that already use the transport network and therefore have the opportunity to benefit from the improvements that this will bring, but also scope for trying to develop a network that enables far more of us to be able to use this and fit public transport in within our daily working lives and how we go about doing our business. So, like I say, we've got two speakers this morning. We have Colin Lee, who is the Commercial Director for Transport for Wales Rail Services, which is the part of the which Keolis Amy run the rail services in Wales, and Colin's the Commercial Director for that, and was heavily involved in the franchise bid process up to that successful bid and award, and starting in October last year, was it, Colin? Yeah. And Professor Mark Barry, who is a Professor of Practice from our School of Geography and Planning, who, as he noted on Twitter yesterday, has been talking about this for almost 10 years now. So hopefully he's updated his slides, because I'm not learned from, well, unlike some of us who keep the same slides forever. So it'll be interesting to see what Mark's got to say. Yeah. I believe Colin is on first. Yep. So I shall hand over to Colin, who's firstly going to give us the Transport for Wales perspective.
Cool. Thank you very much. And thank you for the invite to this fantastic building. I'm really intrigued by this light, which is just wonderful, isn't it? Right, so I'm Colin Lee. I'm the Customer and Commercial Director, which is far too long, and it's about to get longer. So I'm actually going to become Customer Experience and Deputy Chief Operating Officer, which is ludicrously long, so I have to find a way of summarising that. But I was also the bid director during the bid for Keolis Amy, and I suppose I've been involved with this project for about 3.5 years now. So it's quite important to me, and I've moved the family here to Wales to deliver this, so it's massively important as something I'm very proud of in my career, having been part of. And there is a link, and there'll be a lot of overlap between what me and Mark say, but actually I think Mark really was the catalyst in getting us involved in bidding for this opportunity, it has to be said. So it's nice to be here presenting alongside Mark and thinking about what comes next as well. So, a little bit about the structure. So you'll have heard that name Transport for Wales, you'll have heard Transport for Wales Rail Services, and you mentioned Keola's Amy. How does that all kind of work together? So the new franchise in Wales has moved from the Department for Transport across to Welsh Government, so it is managed very much locally. A not-for-profit company called Transport for Wales has been set up to deliver that franchise, but also a lot of other consultancy. It's not a policy-setting organisation, but it is a delivery arm. And then the rail part of that is Transport for Wales Rail Services, does what it says on the tin, and we're here to deliver for the next 15 years the contract for the whole of Wales and borders, and the £738 million transformation of the metro, or what I should say the next phase of. So Transport for Wales itself is, our vision is to create a transport network we can be proud of, and we know we're starting from a difficult place. Transport investment in Wales has been massively underinvested for a long time, and I know Mark's doing other work with Welsh Government to try and fight for a greater share of that proportion of both enhancements money, but also actually renewals money. So it's great to actually have some money. You know, in the last franchise, the last 15 years, we either had about £400,000 to spend on a couple of car parks. Now they went a little bit beyond that, and they found some money, and they did some work with Welsh Government to go a little bit more than that, a few £1 million. But we have about £5 billion, so it's somewhat different scale. And what we're doing is going to be fantastic, but it is a journey, and it's going to take us at least 3 or 4 years before you really see that on the ground, because ultimately new trains take time to build, tracks and electrification takes time to build, but it's coming. And what I'm trying to do today, conscious that some of you might have heard elements of this presentation before, is try and give you a bit of an update about what we've done in the last 9 months as well, and what's coming in the kind of next 6 or so months. So what's happening across Wales? So we really wanted to bring transformation across the whole of Wales. I'm going to talk a lot about the metro in a minute. But in terms of the bid, we wanted to make sure that the North Wales Metro, you know, Wrexham Bidston line and the areas around Deeside Industrial Park, were as much transformed as the South Wales Metro. So every single train that you see today in Wales gets replaced. Every single one of them go. And that's £800 million worth of new trains, and 95% of journeys in the future on brand new trains. The 5% are some really nice intercity trains which we think customers love, the Gerald service, if you know it, which we're going to upgrade to better coaches but not new, so we didn't want to put a DMU type service on that one. We didn't think that's what people wanted. And also some upcycled, you could call them new trains, but we're not directly calling them new because they are repurposed. There's only 5 of them, so it's not a huge thing, but they are the other 5%. More than 50% of those will be assembled in Newport at CAF's factory down here in South Wales, which is actually starting to create a rail industry in South Wales. And assuming that we get the test track facility up in the Neath Valley going, which I have to say is a fantastic opportunity, and we are really starting to build a bit of a rail industry in Wales from frankly nothing. We've also got a phenomenal amount of money to spend on stations, so around £200 million for the size of Wales and compared with other franchises around the UK is probably the most any franchise ever had to spend. That's in there are a whole bunch of funds. Some are very specific, some are known what we will spend it on, some things we want people's views, we want to take time to consult. So the £15 million for accessibility, we don't know if that's going to be 100 small schemes or a few big schemes, but we want to consult. Actually, about half of that is already spoken for, and we're delighted that the Access for All programme has meant that we've almost doubled what we put in. So we've put in about 7 million, we're getting another 7 million from UK government, and that allows us to do a whole bunch of accessibility improvements at places like Abergavenny, Paddoxton, and others around the patch. There's 1,500 new parking spaces. We're not anti-car. It's important that appropriate car journeys, hopefully electric car journeys, are made to stations like Parkway stations, those kind of things. So we're putting in at least 1,500 new parking spaces. And there are a lot of stations out there with some lovely heritage buildings which have been left and they're not used. They need a little bit of money spent on them to bring them up to a decent state. That could be central heating, it could be just a bit of plasterwork, those kind of things. if you look at Pontypridd at the very ground level there's a huge space, completely empty, not used because no one's ever found the money to spend on it. So we've put aside a ring-fence fund of about £10 million to bring 40 of those places up, and they'll be used as community facilities for scout groups and yoga classes and those kind of things, which will bring the communities much closer to the railway. £15 million for new ticket machines, that's 236 new ticket machines, many stations having ticket machines for the first time. Many stations, some of which I suspect you'll know in this audience, have a ticket machine on one platform, but it means you have to go up and over the footbridge to get to it, to come back and up and over. We will stop that, and that's happening later this year. So those are ordered, they're coming from Scheitenbachmann in Germany, the best machines you can frankly buy at the moment, and they will be coming in this year. So the first one will be trialled, I think, at Cardiff Bay. And we're providing free Wi-Fi on all our trains, but also all our stations, and yes, that does include even the tiniest places like Sugarloaf and Dolgarrog, which have about 50 people a year using them. And ultimately, this is not about moving metal boxes and getting really efficient and moving metal boxes around the country. This is about economic development, this is about jobs, this is about connecting people with opportunity. And we're creating over 600 new jobs and 450 apprenticeships. So there are huge opportunities, and 60 of those new jobs have already been created. So what have we done so far? So actually, we've begged, stealed and borrowed any train we can find anywhere in any field, anywhere in the UK. We found 5 Class 153s, we found a Class 37, which I know is an old train, but it's extra capacity, it's extra seats, and actually people have really reacted really well to that. So we've brought in some extra capacity where we possibly can, but we know people want more than that, and we're doing everything we can to find additional trains. We've brought in a new service to Liverpool using the Halton Curve, a piece of infrastructure up in the north. We've completed full Wi-Fi on all trains. I know there's only a 20 meg limit on that. There is a business case live at the minute to raise that to 50 megs, so fingers crossed my exec sign that off. We've got a fully bilingual customer comms now, so you can converse with us in Welsh on social media, you can write to us, you can call us, all those kind of things. We've introduced 3,000 new cheaper fares across the network, many links between stations that never had cheap fares in the past. We've brought card payments to catering. It's a tiny little thing, but actually you can pay by card for a Mars bar and a cup of tea, which you couldn't do before. We've brought in a special panel of all forms of disability, some clear and some hidden, who are helping us with the design of new trains and those kind of things. We've created 60 new jobs. We've actually started modifying the trains. The first Class 175 on the Marches train rolls out on Monday with a full rebranded interior with plug sockets, with Wi-Fi, better aircon, disabled access, new toilet, loads of stuff. It's going to be fantastic. It's the first one, but on the Cambrian line, the 158s, we are, I can't quite read it now, I've got to get my numbers right, 15 of 28 are done. So we are really starting to see those improvements. Delay repay 15. If you're delayed by more than 15 minutes, you now get compensation. That was never there in the past. We're trialling smart ticketing. We've done 40 station deep cleans. Some of those have made a phenomenal difference to local communities. We've got a new signage scheme which we've trialled at 2 places, at Pontypridd and Wrexham General, which will now be rolled out for the rest of the year. We've brought new uniforms and a whole bunch of other things. So although there is still an awful lot to do, and although on many occasions I know the service isn't up to expectations at all, particularly for commuters, we've actually done an awful lot in those few months we've been in charge. So, what is the Metro project all about? So, Metro is not just about trains, by the way. Metro is about linking all forms of transport together, and that could be walking and cycling, active travel as we call it. It could be bus travel, and the key interchange that's being built in Cardiff soon for linking bus and train together will be a key part of that, but equally as much in Caerphilly, where we'll have electric buses, and Pontypridd, where we'll have a really great interchange there as well. So it's about linking all forms together. It's about some more light rail elements. It's allowing us to extend onto light rails type line of sight type signalling, and Mark will talk a bit more about that in the future later. But it's also about bus rapid transit, better forms of bus, so giving bus priority, getting it ahead of traffic, getting it out of congestion. And why are we doing that? Well, we're doing that because South East Wales has some areas of very high economic performance. There's some areas of Cardiff that are doing pretty well in comparison to the UK, something like 104% of the UK average. But there are other areas which are a long way behind, 64% of the UK average. If you take Penrhyn Khyber, right in the centre of the valleys, there is 50% child poverty. 50%. That is shocking. And so this, more than anything, is about totally repurposing the valleys network from something which was built to move coal to something which is actually an urban transport system which allows people to move around up and down the valleys, as much up the valleys as much into Cardiff. So that's why we're moving our headquarters to Pontypridd. We want to move up the valleys. The DWP are moving to Forest as well. We want to bring opportunity to the valleys, as well as just saying to people who live in those areas of deprivation, come to Cardiff, come to Bristol, come to London, etc., for the opportunity. And really it's about agglomerations. It's about bringing people closer together, reducing journey times, making transport more frequent, and bringing it all together so that economic activity can flourish. So we will be acquiring the core Valley Lines infrastructure, so the current track that we see out here, from Network Rail in September this year. So the Welsh Government will be buying it and leasing it to us for the 15 years of the contract, and we will then become the infrastructure manager. So everything will be under our control. There will be no separation anymore between Network Rail owning track and maintaining it and us operating trains. It will be in one place, which will allow us to do some different things, hopefully quicker and more efficiently, and ultimately to undertake the transformation. So 738 million buys us a totally transformed network. But we're also being quite clever about how we spend the money. So we're not just going to electrify everywhere. We know, on the Great Western Main Line, for example, that demolishing a whole load of bridges, which were actually links through to communities, was massively disruptive and hugely costly, by the way. By using a thing called smart electrification, which effectively means putting batteries on the trains, so the trains can go through those sections without needing the wire, we save 55 bridges having to be demolished. And you can imagine the impact that would have on local communities to have to demolish and rebuild a bridge, which is many, many months' work, as I'm sure you'll understand. We're also going to build new stations. Suffice to say, the stations in some cases are just not in the right places. Treforest Estate's a perfect example of that. If you've ever been there, it's a really weird position, a very odd station indeed. So we're going to move that much closer to Nant Garw and the Colin, and we're going to build completely new stations like Cruz Road, where there is a whole community that has appeared really, which was never there before, and therefore there was never a station there. And additional footbridges, and the big one, the depot, and we've actually started. So if people say, "Oh, this is great to hear all this stuff about Metro over many, many years," we've actually started demolishing the area for the depot. So this has now started. We've ordered the trains, they're funded, and they're being built. The depot is being demolished. The design is at a very advanced stage. So this is happening now, and actually the time to start worrying about what goes where is kind of ending. This is now about building. So what difference does it make? Well, if you can see this diagram here, the left-hand side is kind of as it is today. So if you travel in from Rumney, you've got about 1 train an hour, from Treherbert 2, and from kind of Ponty 6, which is all right, but it's a fundamental change once we get to December 23. So each of the heads of the valleys goes to 4 trains an hour, and they obviously come together in Pontypridd for 12 trains an hour. So a fundamental difference. We also maintain the link through to Barry and Penarth and Bridgend via the Vale of Glamorgan from the Rumney line, and we've got the direct services into Cardiff Bay. So at the moment you've got that funny little shuttle that goes between Queen Street and the Bay, up, down all day long, and it's great for Arriva's punctuality figures because it's on time. Sorry, it's a little side joke at Arriva. I'm sure we'd have done the same if we were in the place. But so it's about making direct links through to the Bay, and the Bay station is in the wrong place, right? So the other thing we're going to do is move it. We're going to bring in a whole bunch of new trains, so that on the Rumney line we get things called tri-modes. And why are they tri-modes? The first thing to say is there is something a bit innovative here, but it's not that innovative. So each of those modes works fine alone, so diesel, overhead wires and battery. In some cases there are 2 modes, so the Great Western trains you now travel on to London, are bi-mode, so they are diesel and overhead wire. Ours have batteries as well. Now that hasn't been done anywhere, so it is a little bit innovative, but each of those individual bits work on their own. So we don't think it's a major issue, and there will be little balises, as we call them, by the track, which tell the train when to change between the different modes. That's exactly how it works on Great Western at the moment, and it's proved to be very reliable. We'll copy that. And it will bring a huge increase in capacity, not just through frequency, but also the capacity of the vehicles themselves. And these are absolutely phenomenal vehicles. They're built by Stadler, they're Swiss engineered, they are superb. And they're coming to Greater Anglia, and they're about to launch in Greater Anglia, so if you happen to be in East Anglia, Norwich or Ipswich or something, then do go and have a go, because that will be a taste of what's to come. And then for the rest of the valleys, so those for three, the Treherbert, Aberdare, Merthyr as we call them, the TAM, we have tram trains, or metro vehicles as we're calling them. And we're trying to think of a word in Welsh to reflect what they're called, so if anyone's got any ideas, then do. Tri-mode is quite easy, it's Tremoth apparently, but metro vehicles, we haven't quite got there yet. But these are a fundamental difference, because they set up something which we can then extend all over the place. So we can then start running on street like a tram, and we can run in a more light rail style, so we can accelerate and decelerate much faster and get people on and off much quicker. And they will make a big difference. This is the new Cardiff Bay station visualisation, so right outside the Wales Millennium Centre, the current station just drops you a long way from where you actually want to be. The bay has changed phenomenally, it's a great place to go, but it's really difficult to get to, particularly from Cardiff Central, and we've got ideas, and Mark will talk about them, about how we will do that. But what are the challenges? Well, I think in the meantime, we need to make sure that we do everything we can on customer service, and I know we haven't always done that, and so we've got a programme of huge culture change in customer service. We're taking everyone out of their jobs to go through proper think like a customer training, as we call it. We're giving people sorry vouchers, which are empowered to give to customers if they've had a bad experience, to get a tea or a coffee or get some dry cleaning, those kind of things. So we're changing that culture from being one where it's very much protect revenue and hit customers over the head every time, to something where we try and encourage more people to use the trains, because that's the right thing to do overall in the long term. We have got some innovation in here. You know, tri-mode trains are a little bit innovative. We need to make sure all of that works. There are some complex challenges while we build this. We've got to try and keep trains running as much as we can, but we have to remodel Queen Street. We have to redouble a lot of the track. We have to put up electrification masts. We have to do a load of testing. We have to train drivers on a wholly different form of operation. We need to integrate with planning. We need a big comms campaign with local line-side neighbours and those kind of issues. And of course, there are massive expectations. And I kind of knew that before I came here, but 6 months in, I really understand how big the expectations are. And on the first day, when I travelled in on the train, all proud that we'd won and all the rest of it, and people were going, well, where are the new trains then? I was like, oh God, this is going to be a lot harder than I thought. And so where next? I just want to quickly tell you, in the next 9 months, what's happening. So the Pacers go in December this year, all gone. And we have a 61% increase in Sunday services as well. So you will start to see Sundays look much more like a Saturday service. Sundays just haven't kept track with life. You know, Sundays is leisure day. The railway is still back a long time ago, when probably it was hard to get a drink in Wales on a Sunday sometimes. We bring in newer rolling stock. We're bringing in customer ambassadors. These are people who are not gate line staff. They're not ticket office staff. They will just be roving around, helping people, giving people extra advice and help. And that's a trial in Cardiff and Chester, and we hope to make further. We're rolling out the fleet refurbishments, and there's a kind of image in the top right there, or top left on the side, of the what the new 175s will look like. I've mentioned the new ticket machines. There's smart cards coming. There's pay-as-you-go ticketing, where you'll be able to touch in and out with a contactless bank card and just travel, and that will be next year. We've got free Wi-Fi across trains and stations working seamlessly, so you log in once and it just works. Automatic delay repay, so if you buy an advance ticket with us and you're then delayed, it just automatically pays you back the compensation. And a next generation website and app, which we're spending more than £1 million on, including a whole bunch of new stuff which you currently can't do, like door-to-door journey planning. So it will tell you to cycle to a railway station or to take a bus as well as the rail. It will help you plan during disruption. It will integrate with Visit Wales. There's even a loyalty scheme and a whole load of other improvements which are coming, including a chatbot, which we need a name for. So if you've got any ideas, then do let me know. And that, I think we're taking questions at the end, aren't we?
That's right.
So that's a quick zip through what we're doing. I'm incredibly excited about that. I'm really, really pleased to be here in Wales delivering it. But it's not the end. And it's a 15-year contract plus 2. It's actually 17 potentially. And Mark's got lots of great ideas for where we go next, and we'd love to be part of that. So over to you, Mark. No pressure.
Sorry, I was enjoying it. Forgot about my job.
Thanks for that, Colin. I think that's very useful to see, obviously, where things have gone in the last 6-8 months and the plans going forwards. To put that in a bit of a broader context, I think Mark is now going to talk a bit more about the broader city region travel and so on. So I shall hand over to Mark.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Colin, because there's stuff going to happen, at last, which this region has needed for decades. So it's amazing and fantastic to hear Colin describe what we're going to get. As you know, I've been going on about this for quite a long time. I think David Stevens is in the room. We started this conversation with the Cardiff Business Partnership in 2010-11, which was 8-9 years ago. It takes a long time, but actually in terms of big projects, it's actually remarkably quick to go from a concept to actually have an organisation on the ground delivering actually now. What I want to cover today is not about the nuts and bolts of what's coming. I'll briefly touch on that. It's really about some of the wider context, the stuff I'm more interested in about the region, about our use of cars, where we build houses, economic development, because actually the metro on its own should be a catalyst for how we think about how we want to live in this part of the world. And carrying on doing what we're doing, especially with climate emergency, is not really tenable. I'll also touch upon the recent announcements from Cardiff Council, which I had quite a bit to do with behind the scenes, which I think is really important for the city as well. So there's lots of regional opportunities, but there's big opportunities in Cardiff as well. The first thing I've now started doing, because of my epiphany on climate change a few months ago, and my views on road projection, is we've got a massive problem. Globally, in the UK, we now have, in Wales, over 80% of people commuting in cars. You go back to the 1950s, it was less than 50%. People used active travel and public transport far more way back in the 50s and 40s and even the 60s. We've got so hooked on a car, we've built our lives around it, having a damaging impact. And you can't just electrify that. You've got to change what we do. And that requires some really radical thinking. And it actually puts a lot more pressure on people who deliver public transport services. I think we need to think about not just doubling, but actually doubling again the kind of capacity we're talking about. I did a presentation a couple of years ago about cars, and I'll just quickly touch on that. These are some pictures where I live. And I said, what do you notice? And people said, well, yeah, cars. The key thing you notice is they're not moving. Most of the time cars do nothing. And the real issue we have is we've built an ecosystem of mobility that's very expensive, massively long supply chains to build all these vehicles that for 95% of the time do nothing. If you run a business and your capital was employed for only 5% of the time as an FD or a manufacturing director, you would be sacked. Yet we tolerate this, and we're talking about electrifying and automating this really inefficient ecosystem of mobility, which will only cause further damage to our environment. So we've got to change. And notwithstanding that, you look at the kind of the health and risks of car mobility. Every day in the UK, on average, 5 people die as a result of some interaction with a motorised vehicle. 1,700 a year. If the public transport network killed that many people, it would be closed down. Right? We become completely desensitised to the damage that cars do to our lives. We've got used to it, we've accepted this carnage on our roads. A cyclist every day on average in the UK dies. That's not acceptable. So then we have to do things different. But I accept cars will always be there, and cars provide this liberating force, this mobility kind of revolution at the beginning of last century. It was very important. It allowed people to do things differently. But I think what we're recognising now, actually, in real terms, car usage over the last 15 years has flatlined, really. What we failed to do enough of is provide a viable alternative. And what's really sad about that conversation and about needing more public transport is that the metro and all of this kind of great, fantastic stuff, we used to have it. You look at the Cardiff tram network in the 1920s or the South Wales rail network that's been up just before the First World War. We had everything that we're talking about now. So when people say to me, Mark, and they have done and they still do, we can't do that, Mark, it's too hard, it's too difficult. Well, I go, well, people who are older than me, people who now died and their colleagues built this stuff in the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century. There's nothing novel about public transport that I'm talking about. It's all been done. And I always like to show this slide as well. You know, Cardiff dodged a bullet in the 1970s. You know, on the back of Buchanan and Moses in the US, where roads were king and we were putting up our railways. You know, there was something called Centre Plan 70, and I think I mentioned this. I was, as a kid, I was taken with this kind of, we're going to knock all these buildings down, put dual carriageways everywhere. You know, dual carriageway around the castle. There would have been a motorway, dual carriageway, motorway down here. It would have been absolute carnage. As a 7-year-old, I thought it was fantastic. The trouble is, a lot of people who are 37 or 47 still think that's fantastic. I think that's a problem. So we dodged the bullet in the oil crisis in 1973, and the Saudis helped actually save a lot of Cardiff from what would have been a completely cataclysmic urban outcome. So just quickly on cars as well, in the M4, this was a very difficult decision, and I was always quite agnostic and supportive of maintaining some form of good road connectivity. But the reality is, every major road, anywhere in the world, at peak times, is congested. And everywhere anyone's built more road space, it fills up. In California, they spent £1 billion, I think, on the 101 or the 405. Within 2 years, it's full. And actually, the DFT's own data on induced demand, I looked at some work they did 2 or 3 years ago, and they did the academic research of all the examples of induced demand. You build road space, you get more cars. And actually, that induced demand effect's worse when there's suppressed demand, where there's already urban congestion. So I've no doubt, if you build anything on the airport, you're not going to create a free-flowing car ecosystem. You're going to create congestion elsewhere, and eventually you'll backfill. If you've got to spend £1.4 billion, seems to me we've got to start investing in the things that are really going to help us change what we do, rather than reinforcing our bad habits we've built over the last 50 years. And the worst thing about, I think, road congestion is that the issues of congestion and carbon emissions, you can appraise in a transport appraisal, you can count it, you can quantify it, and say, we build the road, there's this carbon impact, this congestion impact. The impact that's not being counted is the long-term impact of induced demand. The fact that we build houses around the car, when we sprawl, we build business parks around the car, we build hospitals, even now, and it bugs the arse off me, that Welsh Government has built a hospital at Llanbretha, overlooking Cwmbran. Every time anyone goes there, every time they delivers a letter, goes to repair something, goes to visit a patient, requires a car journey. And if we keep doing that, then we're going to just make the problem we have now in climate change even worse. So we've got to kind of decouple from that. And that long-term impact of changing our spatial environment to hook around the car has never been costly, because you can't, it's not easy to cost. And DFT found this. This is a big number, we don't know what it is. When you do transport appraisal, that impact really doesn't get counted. And that's our problem in how we look at transport projects. The fact that we've now sprawled and we've got housing issues all over the country, where we've built thousands and thousands of homes that could be accessed by a car. I mean, it's actually, when you look at it in black and white, it's crazy. So, coming on the metro, I think it's beginning to provide an alternative, and it requires lots more investment, in my view, than we've already committed. And when I started this conversation, and this is some old slides, sorry, but I did say that, my 2012, 13, 14, 15, it goes on and on. It was never about transport, it's about the economy, about connectivity, about enabling the right kind of development regeneration, addressing, always about modal shift and climate change. I always made that point. I didn't realise how important that would become so quickly, actually, in relation to these early presentations. And trying to create some sort of cohesion in South East Wales, in an area that's kind of been struggling for decades with the demise of the coal industry. And actually, again, you know, I don't claim all these ideas of my own. People may have seen this. There's a book published in 1936, South Wales Needs a Plan, Electrification, Rapid Transit Systems, Better Regional Governance. You know, the kind of stuff we're talking about now was talked about 80 years ago. So the lesson there is that loads of good ideas, mine, others, people have got loads of ideas. Very few actually happen. We have to ask ourselves, what are the conditions required to have an impact, to get something that can be delivered in a way that Keir was saying, the Transport for Wales Rail Service is now going to deliver the first phase of Metro. It's really hard, actually. And it's not the way people think. The amount of Machiavellian conversations that go on behind the scenes, even on this phase of Metro, and I'll do an after-dinner speech on this one day, people wouldn't believe. These things are not straight-line projects based upon a good business case. There's a lot more goes on. That's South East Wales, quickly, context for the region. And I always kind of do this, you know, I think in 1910 we had that rail network. There was a cohesion in the psychology of South East Wales, I assert, because everyone was involved in some form, probably in the coal industry. And there was an economic dividend that was all shared, hard work, dangerous work, but everyone had an income, shipping, selling, washing, trading around coal. There was a Glamorgan authority. There was a kind of sense of what this place was in South East Wales, whether you were an Abercon boy or Grange Town. Right? That's gone, right? So, part of the reason for our political challenges maybe is that fragmentation both in our economy, in our politics, and then maybe there's the sense of some places are getting more than other places. And I think there is some evidence for that, not universal. So you have some shiny stuff in Cardiff, some beautiful places on the coast, but we do have, and I have travelled around the valleys, and not to patronise, but I like to talk, and Paul Hamilton Boy, on a pandy. There are some serious challenges that have been cooked in since the 1930s. And everything we've done in many cases, and there's been a lot of well-meaning efforts to try and address these problems, have not really worked in many cases. In some cases it has, so it's not sort of bail out with the bathwater, but in many cases it hasn't. And one of our key issues is poor transport connectivity. Partly because of our geography, going east-west across the valleys is really, really difficult. Some things gravitate to Cardiff, which is good for Cardiff, and I want to see this place grow more sustainably. But we can't do that at the cost of the rest of the region. So let's talk about Cardiff a little bit. That's not to say that it's not important, but I've been involved in Cardiff Council's work on this crossroads, which is key. For whatever reason, and we had a situation, the reality is that the population of the region is going to go from 1.5 to 1.6 million in the next 10, 15 years. Most of that growth, actually, whatever we like about it, has been in Cardiff. So it's gone from 300,000 in 2001, 365,000 now, expected to get to over 400,000 in the next 10 years. That has huge issues associated with how we accommodate that in terms of houses, in terms of jobs, and especially mobility. How do we support movement that's going to be carbon friendly and sustainable? I also come on, it's interesting, we look at GVA stats, depending on what source you take, you get different numbers, and I know Calvin's in the room, and we've got different views on it. I use them because they make a point. I am equally suspicious about how we use these big grand scale of numbers. But Cardiff and the Vale's GVA per capita compared to the UK average is about 94, 95%, and actually gone down over the last 10 years. So Cardiff is not the emerald city in UK terms, it's just about holding its own. And the whole of the UK economy is skewed massively towards the GVA output of London and South East especially. So you compare yourself to Manchester, Liverpool, these, then the differences, they're not as huge as you might think because of the way the economy of the UK has become over dependent upon financial services in the South East of the UK. Cardiff has some issues in some parts of the city of, index of multiple deprivation figures show us, it's got more super output areas on that index than any other local authority in South East Wales. So I hate this Cardiff versus Valleys thing. We've got to look more at the more granular basis and look at what places need on a smaller scale. I forget the local authority boundaries. Let's look at what the issues are, what the opportunities are, and respond to that without any prejudice about whether it's north of Castle Cock or south of Castle Cock. Going back to some of the work on Metro earlier, one of the things that it strikes me, if you're going to improve and deliver sustainable transport options, you've got to look at the data. And one of the realities, we did some work in 2013 looking at the most densely parts of South East Wales that are most disconnected from rail services. And you can see on the bottom right, in red, the most disconnected parts of the region in Newport and the whole east of Cardiff. And that's important because if you want to improve the employment catchment of something like Pontypridd or Merthyr or Newport or Barry, these places have to be accessible by the most people you can in the region. Now, if you live in east of Cardiff and you haven't got a car, you're really not going to think about working in Pontypridd or Treforest or Cumbrae. You're going to be much more focused on where my bus can get you, which is a much shorter circumference. But we want to support more jobs in places like Barry and Merthyr and Pontypridd. Maybe not the same kind of jobs as in Cardiff, but if I don't be paying £24 a square foot in Cardiff, or I can be paying £22 or £18 or £16 in Pontypridd, especially if I've got the kind of business that's more in tune with that. So we have to provide connectivity that makes it easier for more people to go to more places, in my view. We also need to think about the kind of interventions that will work in places that are not going to respond to the traditional shiny big building agglomeration economics. And I know there's a lot of questions here, and I haven't got all the answers, but that's part of the conversation as well. So in all of that, I think whatever we do, transport's really important. And back again in the 2013 Metro Impact Study, and what Colin is doing now is really only the first phase of the work we identified there. People say Metro won't solve the M4 problem. Well, not this first phase. We identified major investment which required across the whole South Wales main line, across Valley, the Ever Valley line. We have to look at what the work of Transport for Wales now as one step on what should be a 30-year programme of major investment to give us a real alternative to car use and problems that causes. So when I was working with Welsh Government, there was a kind of a vision for Metro that I helped ministers kind of enunciate with an announcement of Pontypridd Station in 2015. It was all about this, about kind of a multimodal system, heavy rail, light rail, bus rapid transit, faster, more frequent, extendable, and really being part of something that can provide some cohesion for the city region. And actually, that's what's being delivered. So, you know, I kind of pinch myself in a way, because going through the conversations I had with David Stevens in Admiral, up in the old Pearl building or whatever it was, you know, can this really happen? But it's actually being delivered. So we're getting the building blocks of this over the next 4 years. I know there's a lot of kind of expectation out there, and I've raised a lot of that expectation myself. Yeah, and I keep telling people, don't worry, 2022, 2023, it'll start kind of landing, and you'll see something I think will kind of shock and surprise people because of how different it is from what we've got now. Again, like with those figures on road injuries, we become so desensitised to our rail services, we're going to be completely shocked and flabbergasted when this new stuff arrives early in the next decade. So I'll quickly skirt over this because lots more new trains would be fantastic. Tram train for me is the really interesting piece because it does allow us to do things you can't do with heavy rail. They can go up steeper curves, tighter gradients, they can operate the tramway principles, which means the extension opportunities or the new links we can consider are things we never could have done before. And things we might have ruled out in the past become possible. So the challenge for the region and politicians and officers and planners is to think, oh, what can this kit allow us to do? Where can we go now? Cognizant of being honest in transport planning and you know, the cost of these things. And I've got some suggestions. Another thing I'm keen on, this is again from the CFW slide, the metro will double capacity in terms of how many people it can carry at peak times. That's fantastic. My kind of challenge will be, I don't think that's enough. I think we should go and double again. Given there's less than 8% of people over Wales using public transport to commute, we've got to go 8, 16, 32. I think we should be doubling that again. And actually the conversation, I think from a policy perspective, given the climate emergency, should be bringing that right to the front, sooner, I think, rather than later. So as Colin said, this is the network that's coming. It is fantastic. There's going to be more trains, faster services, new stations, and again, a transformation in all of our experiences in mobility. But like I say, it's the first phase, and there are things that are not being done just yet, which we need to do. There's a few examples there. I mean, I've got a bugbear about the Colin line, which is still specified at 2 trains an hour. That really needs to be 4 an hour. Same with the City line. We've got issues we know on the Abervale line and on the Maesteg line because of infrastructure constraints that need to be dealt with. We've got opportunities for other stations. So there's a lot going to happen, but there's a lot more still to do. And we've got to maintain that momentum. We can't just let this stop as a one-off project. There are plenty of things we can be working with. So I want to just talk quickly. I'm quite short how much time I've got here because I've got
5 minutes.
10 minutes? Okay, good, yeah. One of the things that I think really gets my job, and I'll skip that, is what we build and where we build. I did a presentation in London a few weeks ago and I've talked about this and I've written some blogs and I've got some conversations. And I don't want to be seen as being critical, overly critical as the volume house builders, but we've got ourselves in a situation where we've started building things and built over the last 40 years, gazillions of houses that are designed on the car. And we've been sold this model of a 3 or 4 bedroom house that is what we want. But actually I think this has been terribly damaging to how our world works. And we've got to unpack that and have a conversation with everybody about what do we want to live in and where? And what can we afford? And what's the cost of those choices that we're making or have been making? So I'm a big believer in something called transit-oriented development. Again, I'm not an expert in this, but you look around the world, the idea where we start thinking about development in relation to connectivity and sustainable connectivity and community development in a way I just don't think we've done enough of in the past. And for me, it's things like we've got to start building more densely. There's an interesting conversation that goes on in Cardiff. People then slag off the new housing over to the northwest, and at the same time they slag off a 6-storey building in the middle of Cardiff. You can't have both. If we don't want the density, by default you're then expected more greenfield encroachment. If we don't want greenfield encroachment, you've got to accept more density. You know, this is a state of preference choice. Really. You can't have both. It's like Brexit. You promised everything to everybody. You can't deliver everything. So what do we try and do? So either we've got to think about really, in policy terms, driving more density, more development around public transport, and not just a bus stop or a 6-month subsidy to a bus service. I mean, proper integrated fixed transit that gives people a real viable choice to not use their car. It means looking at the public realm, looking at road safety, looking at highway engineering, looking at mixed-use developments, looking at tenure. There's a broad conversation that needs to happen on the back of better investment in transport that we've not had, I don't think, enough of. And you go to somewhere like Malaga, and I have popped over there, and I will try and get the train in future, Calvi, because I know flying's not good, and I get that. But people there don't want a 3 or 4 bedroom house 15 miles from the middle of Malaga. You know, Malaga's twice the population and half the size of Cardiff, probably about 4 times the density. People live in 6, 7-story apartment buildings. They rent. There's stuff on the ground floor. There's mixed use. It's not perfect by any means, and it's got its own challenges. But as a way of living, I prefer that than, you know, buying a house stuck on an M4 junction 20 miles away. Well, why would anyone want that when you could have this, in my view? And actually, this is happening all over the world now. People are recognising that the importance of development and transit is really, you can't separate them. And the fact that we have for so long is part of our problem. So Vancouver, you know, Barcelona's done it. Even in Denver, when I was there a couple of years ago, looking at the impact of their new transit system on what it does to development and trying to develop around the transport hubs, because they recognise the car is an issue. You know, we've got to embed this. And this means we've got to start thinking about our cities and our urban realm. If we can remove cars from being our primary choice of mobility, we can redesign how our streets work. We can make them safer. You know, maybe you won't need cycle lanes because the cycle is the preeminent mode of transport along with active travel on many of our streets. You know, it sounds crazy, but that's again how people used to move into the 1950s. People didn't have cars. My parents used to walk or cycle to school in the 1950s. You know, we've had this kind of 40-year thing with a car, which I think people will look back on and go, what the hell happened there, guys? What were you doing? So getting back to metro, and a couple of examples, you know, I think more density, more development around stations and corridors. We better design stations so they become multi-use hubs, which is what we're talking about now with repurposing all the buildings. And I guess design quality is really important as well. I mean, not criticising that well, but some of that utilitarian station design, it's great for the grip, but it's not great for people's lives sometimes, and we've got to change that as well, which I think we can do. And there's lots of potential extension opportunities, and I've written about loads of them, I've blogged them. We put a publication out, I think last year, called Metro and Me, where we looked at things like, you know, Cross Valley, Head of the Valleys, Newport, Philly. But we can think about these now. We have the technology with the tram train, and with now Transport for Wales in place, with responsibility for more than they've ever had before, to start doing things we've never done. So I'll talk quickly about the North West Corridor project, which people will know, the 10,000 houses in Cardiff's LDP, sort of out towards Radder, Craiger, which has drawn a lot of criticism, rightly in many ways, because it doesn't have the transport infrastructure in place to support that full extent of development. When we looked at that, 2013, I mean, there is a potential rail metro corridor, even bus rapid transit to connect that. And my view is, you either decide to do this transport, then you can build the houses and actually can we densify it. Now, I'm no fan of greenfield encroachment, but if you're going to do it in a place where you can give people a choice to get public transport. If you're not going to build this thing, you should stop the housing now. You should say, that's all we're going to do, we're going to reallocate that, but we're going to densify and put 6-story, 7-story apartments in Cardiff. I mean, that's the converse. There's probably a balance in there somewhere. So I'm really pleased that, you know, this sketch on a map and the work we did with, I think it was Capita helped us then, with the urbanists and Steve Davis-Lee, Jones Langlassell, looking at development opportunities and housing. The hope would be, if we did this, you could allocate more houses along the entire route. So it becomes a test bed for proper transit-oriented development. We can get maybe even more housing, but all within sort of 800 metres of the line. That actually helps the business case for the investment, because people will be putting money in the fare box. Without which, it makes it more difficult. If you're going through 2-3 miles of green fields, that's an expensive bit of capital where there's no revenue. So getting a balance right between what you develop and what you're going to build into transport terms is really important. So I hope this can happen. There's also opportunities down the bay, and I know there's work going on. There's an extension of the bay line, there's potentially a new station which could be moved. But for me, the key is getting that bay line softened so we can deal with the issues of Butane integration, community uses. We link it with the city line behind Central, and we provide potential extensions further into the bay and also link it to the west of the city. So that's why I'm really pleased the Cardiff Council have embraced, maybe conceptually at this stage, but they've embraced the vision of a rapid transit network for the city. You know, there's other things we can do around the region, but they want to see this city, which will be 400,000 people in the next 10 years, have a transport network that provides people a real alternative to getting in the car, which is what people tend to do and choose to do. Even though Cardiff's got quite a good mode shift, there's still less than 50% of people using public transport. And the key to that, the first part of this, is things like Cardiff Crossrail, which I first wrote about 2012. It's a crazy idea. I thought, I don't, we'll have a Crossrail, because London will go, let's put that one in. So me and Vaughan Gethin wrote this article. And it is perfectly deliverable, and I'll explain why, but it really is about providing a completely different balance of public transport, east-west. You know, getting out to sort of Road Way into St Mellons, providing easy ways to get across the city. If you link that with bus hubs and bus interchanges, which feed into the stations, you begin to provide a real alternative. So this won't happen tomorrow. This is the sort of thing we should be testing and developing and lining up as the phase to follow this core delivery. So by 2023-24, hopefully some of this is on a launch pad, funded, committed. And he won't do it in one go. And I think there's probably 4 key phases. So to be a bit on this, I think the 2 first key phases are really the existing rail network. So it's the Bay Line, and that's part of the work that Keolis are doing, linking that behind Central up to the City Line. So you've got an alternative route to the Bay that avoids Queen Street, and you then address the issues of capacity on the City Line, which is still only 2 trains an hour. You know, that needs to be at least 4. In doing so, a bit of dullness for the rail nerd, there's a big junction bottleneck in the Canton side is called Cardiff West Junction. That has to be fixed. If we don't fix that, you can't do City Line frequency, you can't do North West Corridor, and you can't get more services to Penarth and Barwick. So by addressing that, you open up the whole network. Redundancy, capacity, reliability, but also extendability as well. So I think, for me, getting these 2 phases done early, quick, provide the foundation. Thereafter, we've got the opportunity then to extend beyond Fairwater, Gatescourt, Radder, some route, through all that housing, and hopefully align to that development programme I described, where housing is built around the route. All the way to Wonderpen Town, to Talbot Green, round to Pontyclean on the main line again. And you then can make that an exemplar, a test bed for how we can build sensible places that are based around public transport. In the east, I think, there's a freight line that runs down the docks from Rover Way. There's about a mile to link up, where tram train could do that, across the north of the Roth Dock. And you can provide a service then that goes through the bay, Roth Dock, up Scott Tremortha towards Rover Way, the main line, and there's a tram train. You could run on the railway, so you could then run that to Parkway, and maybe beyond to Evervale. So you have an opportunity then to run services that kind of don't take up mainland capacity, but run around and kind of traverse the city. Similarly, there's an opportunity to connect the Corrigan line and Taff Vale line near Radder, Morganstown Way. And it may not be a direct physical link, but certainly a link that people, especially in the whole north and northeast of Cardiff, can access easily. Nant Garrow, where there's a new office going, or Pontypridd, where Transport for Wales are based in the headquarters. If we don't provide that connectivity, anyone in huge parts of Cardiff wanting to go there will drive. So we have to think about how we make that connection. There's also proposals for a life science business park at Corrigan as well. So this place needs to be connected, both to Cardiff, but also to the rest of the region. So it's challenging, and I know there's some operational questions to address there, but we need to think about how we do that. So we call it a Cardiff Circle. It might end up being a bit different, but the connectivity is the key thing. And I will show that soon. One of the things I know is key to all of this, and a bigger challenge because of the deregulated nature of the bus networks, is how we bring buses into this. You're not going to run light rail, new rail across all of Cardiff. It will be very expensive. There's an opportunity for bus rapid transit, proper segregated busways that have priority, that have off-vehicle ticketing, that are properly integrated with the rail network, so it looks and feels like the metro. And I think certainly from the northeast of Cardiff, Pentwyn, Llanedin Way, right through the city centre out to Ely, across Cambridge Road, yeah, I'll show you in a minute, is key to that. And I will, just going to finish, before I forget, I'll talk about Cardiff. There are massive opportunities across the region as well. I'm a big fan of being ambitious about connecting the Taff Vale and Rugby lines to provide connectivity between Blackwood, Uston-Murdoch and Pontypridd. If Pontypridd is going to become a commercial hub for the region, it needs to be connected to the other valleys, which it isn't at the moment. Similarly, I think opportunities in Newport as well, and I'm going to go and see Port Council again in a few weeks, just to understand what you can do with tram train you can't with heavy rail. I'm not saying that will happen that way, but there are questions and opportunities that exist because of this technology that we can look at. And again, the M4 corridor, I've written about that, you can go and look online. There's plenty of opportunities, but as I was in the House of Commons yesterday, I said, look, we've got to spend another £1 billion in South East Wales on public transport, because we haven't spent money for 30 or 40 years. And actually, there's plenty of ideas. And now I'm going to shut up. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think it's time for a few questions before we finish today. If Colin wants to come back up. As I said before, as Sarah said at the start, please wait for the microphone before asking a question. So we'll start over there.
Hello there. A couple of questions. Your new shiny trains, or upscaled, or upcycled, whatever the word is, capacity for bicycles?
Okay. Yeah.
And the second question, because much connectivity employees and so on, I might have missed it, but in your plans, the plans I've seen, seem to be a black hole in sort of the Tredegar Park area where you have major employers there, civil service, factories, and so on, doing thousands of people in cars every day. I didn't see any plans there, not necessarily rail, but more bus lanes, etc. Thank you.
Okay, so on bikes, we've got good news. So every one of the new trains have at least 4 bike spaces, and some of them have 6. So that will make a big difference. We're also bringing in a booking system, so you can be guaranteed that the bike will get onto the train. That'll be kind of app-based, so it'll make a big difference. At stations, we're putting secure, so with CCTV and lockers, bike spaces at every single station. So it'll take a bit of time to roll out, but it will make a big difference. Do you want to talk about
On Tredegar Park, it's an example of what roads have done to us. They've allowed us to build houses and office developments, and Newport suffered terribly over the last 30 years. It's become a donut, Langston, Celtic Manor, fantastic place, but motorway based, and you've got all of that stuff in the west. Part of the next question challenges for the region now, there's not going to be the investment in the M4. What do we do? I think Newport needs some tram train potentially, but I think a big role for dedicated busways, properly invested bus systems, where you can go through Celtic Springs, Dufferin, through to the city centre, maybe a new station at Newport West on the Ebervale line and change, into the city centre, interchange with the station, and up to Llanword and Celtic Manor. But that work needs to be done, and you're right, there are gaping holes like that all over the place. So let's not detract from getting the core delivered, but we've got a serious conversation about what else we need as well.
Okay, I think there's a couple of questions over there, and then we'll come to the ones over here, see how time's going after that. So we've got to be more punctual than a Cardiff-based shuttle for finishing today. So.
Hello there. Sarah Jones from Public Health Wales. Thanks very much, really interesting. And just to start, sort of I got a bit of a reflection on something that was said apparently yesterday at the University Transport Study Group about sort of shiny tech and transport solutions allegedly, and you presented stuff about apps from a very female mother of a young child point of view. Actually, I don't care about an app. I want to be able to get on a train with a pram, or has been in the past on crutches, because I've got a habit of being on crutches. But I suppose the bigger concern for me from a public health perspective is the involvement of health in all of these discussions, because we know how much transport contributes to health and to health itself, not just access to health services that Mark alluded to. And Mark's referred to a lot of the key issues, but actually I think there needs to be more ongoing routine discussion with health about how all of these transport decisions affect health, both in a positive and a negative way.
I completely agree with you. So we've held already discussions with the Future Generations Commissioner, and we've had some workshops on that. We've got some big commitments in the bid around active travel. We're going to do station travel plans at every single station so that we can plan safe walking routes to and from stations. Many of them kind of finish at the boundary of the station, which is just not good enough. Additional cycle parking that we talked about, and cycle routes. We've also got a whole bunch of thinking going on about how we make this system more accessible. So every station except for one, Trahavod, which is difficult because of the dual carriageway, and we have got a plan, but it's very, very expensive. But every single one, apart from one at the moment, and it may be in a few months I can say all of them, will be totally step-free. And there will be no gap, either horizontally or vertically, between the platform and the new rolling stock, which will make a huge difference. Not just to wheelchairs, it's huge for that, but for people with sticks, with bikes, with luggage even, it will be a fundamental difference. So there's a lot coming, but once again, it's a few years off, but when it comes, it can make a big difference. What we now need to be doing is working on how do we plan the Velindre Cancer Hospital off on the Corrigan line, and how do we link that in? By the way, it's in a huge cutting, so that's actually quite difficult, but work together with health professionals like yourself to make that work. And I'm very passionate about that. Same with education, same with a whole bunch of public policy stuff, some of what Mark's mentioned earlier. And what we don't want to do as an operator here is fall into the trap that perhaps previous operators may have done and just forget all that and run what we've got and take the money. This is about developing over 15 years and hopefully longer a much transformed, and a mean transformed transport system, not just rail.
Just 2 quick points. I mean, I talked about transport related to health service provision. We've got to find a way of stopping building major health services that completely disregard public transport. So Llan Breck for great investment, but it is not connected to the public transport network. We've also got the biggest hospital in Wales up at the Heath, and as a railway that goes relatively near it, there should be a station. I know it's not currently part of the plans, but I would, I'm going to carry on banging that drum somewhere on Road Park Weather Road. It's 800 metres from the station. That should be somewhere that provides an alternative for employees, not just patients, to be able to access that place without getting in their cars. So policy needs to join up on this stuff.
Okay. Calvin, I think, has got a question as well. So, try and make efficient use of the microphone.
Yeah, thanks very much. Both really good presentations and very optimistic. Actually, nice. So I've been talking to marketers for a long time. We have, I think, a very clear, fairly clear idea about what stations can be in terms of employment hubs, cultural hubs, great places. What I'm worried about is when you step out of your responsibility as an operator off the station kind of grounds, who is organising this dense employment, the closer stations, who's organising EV charging points on land nearby so electric cars, when they are used, can arrive at stations, be charged in the day when people are at work, who's organising overflows of various types to make sure that this is properly spatially planned at a South East Wales level, because I so far haven't seen CCR messaging that they're going to be able to do this, and individual local authorities probably won't have the capacity to engage.
I think this is the fundamental issue. There's an organisation that's got to deliver a transport service, transport network, and that's more than a day job in my view. The real challenge is for the region, politically, civic society, to get its head around what we do in response to a metro. How do we plan? How do we densify? What do we do where? That structure, that governance is still very nascent. You're right. The SDP they've now announced is going to be for 2024, 25. There are real things now we could be doing. I think we could be enforcing some much planner policy guidance, some stronger TAN notes, SPG should start saying, you can't do that anymore, you need to do some of this. Stop that, do one of those. And I'd rather think we were far more on people's faces on some of this stuff than we are at the moment. And that's a real problem, a risk. I think people get the question, but we've not yet articulated a response, which I think we need to come up with quite quickly.
Okay, I think there's a question just goes across to the front after that. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. Peter Badcock, 2 questions. Why is the Rumney Valley line above Astrid Manor not being electrified? And secondly, you seem to be opting for not off-the-shelf trimodal trains instead of tried and tested bimodal trains. Probably a stupid question, but why are you not doing diesel running on the gaps in the electrification instead of opting for the battery?
Okay, so the first question, I have some news, which is it will be electrified actually, because we've been doing the design and we've decided that actually overall it's a better design to electrify to Rumney. There are issues getting high voltage power to Rumney itself as it happens, so we would have had to build some electrification at Rumney station. In reality, it will be easier to feed it from the other end, so we're going to actually electrify the whole lot, apart from Caerphilly Tunnel, which we won't electrify, we'll run through on battery. The reason is purely environmental. It's about having a core value lines network which is zero emissions at point of use. So it's about not having diesel running on the core value lines. It's fully electric. And by the way, all of that electricity is from renewable sources, half of it from within Wales. So a big difference.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I think there's fifth one along, John. Either of those.
Okay. So, Robert Chapman, quick observation. Forgive my impertinence to the gentleman who's introduced this, but just at the beginning, by the way, I think you asked the wrong question. The question shouldn't have been how many people arrive by car. It should have been how many people arrive by active travel. But my substantive question, I think, Colin, is to you, and I think Calvin may have articulated it already. I was just interested to know how your work, in terms of the transport strategy, dovetails into the National Development Framework and the Infrastructure Commission work. So I think it does nod to what Calvin's already said, but I think that's a key point. And are you having active conversations?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, we're an operator, so we don't really get involved in the public policy side of things. But Transport for Wales, as our client, does. And the only thing I would say as the operator is, I'm surprised as a newcomer to the area about how fragmented the governance is, how policies between different parts of relatively small area are so wildly different, and ultimately how, if we're not careful, talking personally for a second, the city deal money could potentially be wasted if everyone wants a little bit of it for themselves. whereas we should be coming together and thinking what's the right thing for the region. And it worries me a little bit, but there are some great stuff going on. The next phase of the Metro is excellent. There's some really good ideas that are coming through for the next thing. Can we all come together and accept that maybe not every local authority will get the exact same share, but the impact on the region will be huge?
Two things. Another question. I'll answer that question. I was in Westminster yesterday giving evidence to the Welsh Affairs Select Committee on City Regions, and the key point I made was we've got a ridiculously complicated governance arrangement for rail, especially transport policy development in Wales, because you've got the UK government responsibility for infrastructure and funding, which hasn't happened. We've got 10 local authorities in this kind of very nascent city region governance. We've got Welsh Government, Transport for Wales that doesn't really have a policy remit, but a delivery and procurement and contract management remit. There is a gap, and we have to kind of shape this as quickly as we can. So there's clarity on where it's coming from in terms of policy and direction and what it's for. And Colin is right. If we end up fragmenting down to the lowest common denominator, we'll have a list of 57 things that have an impact within 50 years, but that's it. And we need to get in some strategic capacity in how we think about developing our transport systems.
Okay. Yep.
Just a question really around how the consumers out there and how the public might respond to this. So we've had a huge amount of detail over the last hour, and it's great to see the concrete plans and particularly the way that everything's going to be integrated going forwards. But we've had an hour of that and can understand that. In terms of the approach to the consumers out there, is it a sort of a build it and they will come type of approach, or is there a real sort of huge campaign required to change people's behaviours and also help them understand that this isn't just about rail, that it goes beyond that and it is an integrated system?
Yeah, I've been involved in quite a few big transport projects around the country and internationally. And the one that's most relevant, I think, is probably the Nottingham tram. So I was involved in that from the very early stages through to operating it. And what's really easy to get kind of bogged down in is all the local issues and all the tiny little things that people worry about during the construction. And that will be a big thing, and there's a huge comms campaign required. But what we can't forget is the bigger picture. And getting across some of these messages again and again and again, it's amazing how often you have to keep repeating yourself. Feel like repeating yourself, but we have to get it across that this will be a bit of short-term pain when we build this, but look what's coming, and it will make a big difference. So when we've got kids who are taking out apprenticeships, or who are just coming to decide where they go to university or where they're going to live, this should be now top of their mind, that in a few years' time they're going to have a world-class transport system. They don't need to go to Bristol or London or Dubai or whatever. They can stay here, they can stay where they grew up, they can be very proud of where they grew up because the opportunity will be here for them. And that's massive, but it's a huge comms campaign. And because we've had so many years of underinvestment, it's a massive super tanker to turn around, and I think we're well aware of that.
Sorry, and given the fact that you're leading on the rail sort of side of things, where's the sort of the joined up sort of approach in terms of the different modes of transport?
I don't think we're there yet. I think there's the integration agenda, which is the most complicated. How do we get buses working with rail in a very seamless way? There's lots of that, and I've drawn lines, and I've talked about this, and so with Colin. But until we have some capability to address and work with the best companies on a very professional basis, to understand the commercial pressures that exist, to look at what we do on concessionary fares, on network design, on operational planning, on through ticketing, we need that capability. Transport Wales, I think, will build up, but it's so focused, and quite rightly, on helping and managing the delivery of this contract that perhaps there's not enough space being given to that. I think everyone knows the question's there, but until we've gone through that, it's difficult to articulate what's coming. Similarly on the planning side, everyone now is recognising as a challenge the question. I don't think we've got a coherent response yet. And maybe that'll be more organic, So Colin's got to focus on, we've got to deliver a railway here, and we don't want to distract from that. But the rest of us have got to be involved in that civic society conversation about the other things. So it's not me saying, or someone saying, everyone here can go back and say, do you know what, we've got an issue on how we live, where we live, and the housing we've got. And that bus stuff's actually a lot more complicated than I thought. How do we help fix that one? And we've all got a chance to contribute to that, I think.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more question. There's lots of other questions going around, but Lisa, you have the last
words. Thank you for that. Building on the behaviour change, so I'm at the Office for National Statistics, and we've got our data science campus. We're obviously very interested in policy-made decisions through statistics and data analysis. Are you using any data analysis or data insights as you work towards 2023, because things can change. You might have to change plans based on people's usage. Are you looking at data capture and data intelligence in the same way TfL looked at how people are planning their routes around the London transport network through turning on Wi-Fi for a particular day? Obviously, that was informed to the people, so there was ethical usage of that. And just making better use of data sources and data capture, so we can have informed decisions and understand how people are using transport networks and where the investment needs to go.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm astonished, having come from other modes of travel, like buses, for example, how little we know about customers. Most people travel around on orange pieces of paper. The magnetic strip in the back only holds a couple of bytes of information, so we don't really know where people are travelling, we don't really know how often they travel, we don't really know much about them. But that's all about change. So we are recruiting a whole bunch of new Insight people. Insight managers literally just started last week. We've got more Insight coming using digital tickets, so smart cards, or some people may use the barcodes on their phone with the app. Sorry, I've got apps here. But we will start to get much more patterns on where people are going. We are working with Telefonica on using mobile phone anonymised data to work out where people ultimately end up. So a lot of people come into Cardiff, but where do they ultimately go? When they travel north to south across Wales, which way are they really going? So there's a lot coming, but as I stand here today, we don't really know much, and so this is a really interesting area, and I think our plans should absolutely change depending on what insights we find, and there's a lot to go.
Okay. Do you want to say?
Just to add to that, I mean, interesting, we go through a kind of transition from, we used to do surveys to determine passenger demands and accommodations, and people to fill checkboxes in. Now we've got to buy huge amounts of mobile phone data. I think we're going to move to the point where transport planning can be done in real time with app-based tracking of people, what they're doing, capturing preferences, which will give us much more real information to do and plan actually in real time, stuff we couldn't do before. And I think actually the impact of that technology might be better in the bus networks, especially in rural areas, using demand responsive transit to aggregate demand in real time, to actually modify bus routes in real time, given where demand is. So I think there's a massive opportunity, I think, as Colin said. It's not been easy.
We're actually working with Welsh Government on an access to services project, looking at real time and where you need, the criteria needs to get it to a GP surgery in 30 minutes by public transport. If you can't, you either move the criteria or you move the GP surgery. So we're working with Welsh Government already, and that technology and that code and that project is available.
Are you working with Transport for Wales as well? I think that conversation needs to happen, I would say, pretty quickly, because they're delivering, right? So there's policy over there, and policy you have lots of great conversations, and you can come out of a room and go, well, that was really great, and then 5 years later you have the same conversation, the same policy conversation, talk to the same people. Actually, the people who are on the ground doing stuff need to have that land in their faces, so that can actually really change.
Okay, I think we're going to have to draw a line there. I'm conscious of the time. If we can perhaps show our appreciation again to both of us. Thank you all for coming this morning, and so the next breakfast briefing is the end of September, so hopefully you'll enjoy your summer break. Thank you very much.